very glad to be here at the Buddhist library and recognizing a few faces I've seen in a few different locations over the last few days. On the weekend at the Palelai Buddhist temple and yesterday at the Nibbana Dhammaraka. So those of you who I've seen before, good to see you again. Those who I haven't seen before, I'm glad you're able to come along for this evening. So the request was to offer some reflections on, I think it's living a good life, dying a good death, something like that. Is that right? So this is similar themes to the subject of the weekend. So I'll probably repeat a few of those teachings and reflections, and also bring in a few other elements that relate to this whole area. First of all, I should emphasize that when Buddhist teachings are given, the principle is that you're not expected to believe or just take on trust what is said as being true or valuable, but rather to listen, to take things in, to measure what you hear against your own experience, and to apply things for yourself and to learn for yourself. The spirit of Buddhism is not a doctrinaire teaching. It's not, putting things across in a way that is, encouraging a blind belief simply from the voice of an authority figure, sort of sitting up front, but rather the Buddha encouraged us to listen and to pay attention to what we're hearing and to test it out for ourselves. Venerable Ajahn Chah was very, my own teacher, Ajahn Chah was very fond of quoting incidents in the suttas where the Buddha had given a teaching, and so he turned to, this is Ajahn Chah's kind of version of the story. It's sort of amalgamated from a few different incidents in the teachings. And after he gave this talk, he turned to Venerable Sariputta and said, Venerable Sariputta, have you heard me give this teaching before? And he said, no, I haven't. He said, well, do you take it to be true? And Venerable Sariputta said, not yet. And so then the group of people that are gathered are kind of shocked. That, well, how could this be? This is the Buddha's chief disciple. He's the great master, and his disciple is doubting his word in front of everyone. And then the Buddha said, well, why is that? And then Sariputta says, well, I haven't had the opportunity to test it out and see for myself. But rather, it's when I've applied these teachings and I see whether they are meaningful, they're true, they're accurate, then I will take that word to be verified. And then, rather than the Buddha saying, how dare you, you're supposed to be my chief disciple, how can you doubt my word? He said, good, Sariputta, good. This is excellent that you, even though you're my chief disciple and you know that the teachings that I give are reliable and helpful, that even in this context you are ready to test things out and try it for yourself. So this was Ajahn Chah's way of rendering these different incidents together, and he was always encouraging people not to believe him blindly, or to take things on trust from traditions or customs, but rather to be your own teacher, to find out for yourself and to learn for yourself. And when we truly test things out and explore what is meaningful and what's valuable according to our own experience, then it goes in a whole different way. It's not just carried around as an idea, but it's something that you've learned, something that you have internalized for yourself. So this theme of living well and dying well, there's a few different ways of approaching this. And what came to mind is really to consider the Buddha's own reflections when he was still a layperson, when he was living the life of a prince in the palace in Kapilavatthu. And he, in his own account, in the stories we have the the journey with his charioteer Channa going out into the city of Kapilavatthu. But those are later stories, and that in the actual sutta that doesn't happen. It describes the Buddha Vipassi in a previous lifetime going out with his charioteer. But there's no, in the Pali Canon, as far as I understand, there's no, I have this great authority of Bhante here. So if I misquote the Pali or the suttas, I know I will be corrected. But in the Pali Canon, there's no such incident in the life of the Buddha Gautama. It's kind of taken that story from the life of the Buddha Vipassi, and then they've planted it into the life of Gautama Buddha. But what he does do is he has these reflections as a layperson, as a bodhisattva. And what he considers is, why should I, being subject to aging, to ailing, to sickness, to defilement, and to death, why should I also pursue other things that are also subject to aging, to sickness, to defilement, and to death? Why don't I instead pursue that which is unaging, unailing, that which is undefiled, the deathless? And so then, in his own description, so then he decided that's what I will pursue. So that's what was his internal reflections. He sort of looked at his life and thought, well, here I am, I'm a prince, I have a comfortable life, but all the time I'm just chasing after things that are impermanent, unstable, and unsatisfying. So is there an alternative? Is there a different way of being? Are there different goals in my life that I can choose? So I feel this is a very powerful reflection as in his own mind as a layperson, and that's helpful for all of us in terms of learning how to live wisely. How much time and energy do we spend pursuing that which is subject to aging, that which is subject to defilement, that which is subject to sickness and death? And if the things that we are pursuing are impermanent, unsatisfactory, unstable, and defiled, what's the great benefit in pursuing those? What is the ultimate blessing or benefit that might come from that? And to ask ourselves that question, and then to follow that up with the Buddha's own consideration as a layperson. Why don't I instead pursue that which is unaging, unailing, free from aging, free from sickness, free from defilement, free from death? So that it sets a bit of a different life goal for us, rather than living wisely, not sort of living to have a really good retirement plan, a really good insurance policy, or just being totally focused on your children's education, or your the particular position of your house or your condominium. I know this is dangerous talk here in Singapore, but this is if we want to live wisely, then we have to look at what are the priorities that we make. It doesn't mean to say you don't care about your children or you don't send them to good schools, but if you assume that ultimate happiness comes from your children coming top of the class and all becoming doctors, you will probably have, if that's your goal in life, you'll probably have, if you consider that you're still able to suffer, you're still able to experience dissatisfaction, and even in families where all the children have become doctors or engineers, that I'm not psychic, I can't read people's minds, but I would guarantee that those of you who have had children who are extremely successful, it's still possible to have suffering in your family life, right? There's a few heads nodding. And then you, as maybe following your parents' expectations, and you went to medical school, or you became an engineer or a professor, and you met all your parents' expectations, but still managed to find dissatisfaction in your lives, right? Yeah, a few more heads nodding. So that it's not as though those worldly goals aren't valuable and have their own place, but if we want to take the Buddha's example and to see how we can really live well, then we have to look beyond those worldly goals of a physical comfort or a really good retirement plan, and just economic security or social security, because those things are not particularly secure. Even if you've got a really good retirement plan, you've got a home in a really good place, you've got the perfect location for your house, and then you find that the neighbours who move in next door successful rock musicians. So they decide to build the perfect music studio in the house next door and have all kinds of rowdy friends driving their loud vehicles all hours of the day and night. So then your perfect house in the perfect place is suddenly surrounded by a lot of unwanted activity. And that, so not to be too depressing, but no matter how hard we try to protect ourselves in terms of physical health, in terms of where we live, in terms of the family setup, family agreements, no matter how hard we try, still all conditioned things are still unreliable, they're impermanent, they're unstable. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All conditioned things are unstable, they're uncertain, they're not controllable, they're not predictable. So with all of the best effort in the world, it's still out of our personal control. So one of the ways in terms of establishing a shift of attitude and learning how to live well is to, and following on the Buddha's own reflections, is to very actively use the daily contemplations, what he called the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. So I talked about this a lot on the weekend. Those of you who are there will remember. So these, again, these can sound pretty depressing. That in terms of learning how to live well, some of the most important themes to reflect on are, I am of the nature to age. I am of the nature to sicken. I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abides supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So these are the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, the abhinna paccavekkhana. And so to the habits of self-view, our self-centered thinking, our ego-based habits, those are threatening. We don't want to think about that. That it's depressing conversation, that we make jokes about, or we feel upset about the fact that we're aging, that we have to dye our hair in order to look as young as we like to. We'd have a few little tweaks at the surgery clinic to get the wrinkles removed. We need to get our eyes checked because our vision is getting a bit blurry, or we need a hearing aid, or we become convinced people don't speak as clearly as they should do. When I was at school, people were taught to enunciate. Nowadays, people mumble. People just don't speak clearly. Everyone's mumbling. So, well, actually, Dad, they're speaking quite clearly. It's your hearing that's blurring things. What do you mean? My hearing's perfectly fine. So we feel threatened. But the Buddha's reflections are extremely pertinent and helpful. If we want to live a good life, then we need to challenge those habits of self-view. I was talking with people today about how their experience of going on a kind of pleasure cruise from Singapore up to Phuket once, and that strangely enough, all the people sunbathing on the deck, they're not all good-looking 23-year-olds. That they're like everybody, they're a bit kind of middle-aged, lumpy, frumpy, and that it's not like in the adverts where everyone is good-looking and 23 and cheerful all the time. That's not the way that people are. That the average person, it does not look like the characters in the advertisements. Those are fake people. They don't really exist. If you sit down and had an interview with any of the models that are in those pictures, they would tell you how much they suffer over anxiety, trying to get, competing with other models to get the contract, to be photographed, and what was going on in their minds when they're taking that picture of them sitting on the deck looking ever so bright and cheerful, that they were actually, I was worried about my dad because he's really in trouble, and that we got a lot of debts, and he's addicted to gambling, and so that's what was really going on in their mind while they're being smiley and cheerful in the photograph. So that the habits of self-view are that I have the right to be comfortable, good-looking, and cheerful at all times throughout my entire life. And if I have to die, as if it was an option, if I have to die, I want to die with all my faculties intact, being able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and think, and still look good, and pass away in my sleep at 95 with no pain and no illness. Yeah, that's the kind of habits of thinking of self-view. And as one of my fellow monks, my brother monks, Ajahn Sujito, pointed out, he said, it's really interesting if you go to a funeral that even when someone's lying in the coffin, they still look like they're kind of dressed up to go to a dance. You know, they're dressed up to look good even when you're dead. You know, that you have to look kind of, right, I'm ready. You know, I'm ready for the party, kind of dressed in your tuxedo or your kind of your good evening gown, and you kind of got all your face is carefully made up, and you look kind of 23 and cheerful, even in your coffin. You're supposed to look good. So these are the habits of self-view, and that if we take refuge in that, and we're trying to sustain that out of a sort of self-centered and say narrow and compulsive perspective, then every sign of aging, every sign of loss, every sign of lack of control is going to be intensely painful, and there's going to be a lot of suffering involved with that. So, and the Buddha saw that we live with a whole array of fears: fear of aging, fear of sickness, fear of death, fear of loss, fear of karmic consequences. You know, of all the bad things that I've done. I don't want to think about that. I don't want it to happen. So the Buddha's advice is to, instead of trying to make that all go away or not think about that, to actually turn towards it. Because in a mysterious way, when you are afraid of death or afraid of aging, afraid of loss, afraid of failure and rejection, that as long as you try to stop thinking about it, you empower it. You make it stronger by the act of rejecting. You can follow that? By not wanting it to be there, you're saying, this is a really dangerous thing, and I'm going to try and protect myself from that dangerous thing that shouldn't be there and is really going to hurt. So we push it away, we hide from it, so we make it into a real thing. We reify it. We make it powerful by the act of rejecting it. But then if you instead turn towards it, it's like you hear some kind of noise outside the window of your house. I mean, I know a lot of you live in condominiums, so there aren't people outside your windows because you're on the 19th floor. But you know, maybe that's not a very good example. But or maybe a noise out in the corridor, some suspicious noise. What's that? What's going on there? And that you just sort of turn up the TV, or you kind of blot out the sound that's making you feel anxious because you don't want to hear it. But you still remember there was a weird noise outside, and I feel threatened, but you're just trying to turn your attention away from it. But if you turn towards it, like you open up the door and say, hello, what's there? Then it changes the dynamic. So the Buddha's encouragement with these reflections is to turn the attention towards that and say, well, that yes, from a self-centered point of view, from the habits of Sakkaya Ditthi, self-view, this is threatening. But of course, this body is of the nature to age. Time only goes in one direction. How could it not? The body is of the nature to sicken. The body is of the nature to die. How could it not be? This is how nature works. How many things have been born that didn't die? Well, you say, well, there's the living beings that are alive at the moment, but that every living being that was, apart from the ones that are alive at the moment, every single living being that was born has passed away. There's a 100% success rate for death. It's that's how nature works. If something is born, it dies. When we ask someone what was the cause of death, we say, well, it was cancer or a car crash, or they had a bad fall. But essentially, the cause of death is birth. That's why beings die, is because they're born. Right? If you weren't born, you wouldn't die. So that the cause of death is birth. So that when the attention is turned towards those qualities, then it's like you open up the door and see who's out in the corridor. You find out what that noise is. You turn towards it. And then what that does is, rather than being depressing, it is threatening to the ego or to the habits of self-view, sakaya ditthi. But in that turning towards and saying, well, what is here? Or how could it be otherwise? Yeah, how does nature work? Then you're opening up the heart to that quality of, oh, of course that's the way it is. How could I not see that? How could I not think that way? And so you're accessing your own wisdom, your own understanding of nature. So you're deliberately shifting the view from a self-centered perspective to a perspective based on Dhamma, based on reality, on nature. So I said most of that over the weekend a couple of times, and so I'll say it again, because this is really extraordinarily helpful, because during the course of a day, how many times are we shaken by those threats to our physical health, the aging of the body, the fear of losing our possessions, worried about the things that we've got, and not just material possessions, but trying to sustain our reputation, trying to say be well regarded by people. Checking your Facebook account. I don't know if Facebook is as popular here in Singapore as it is in Thailand, but there's a huge amount of emotional investment in how many likes you've got, how many followers you've got, if you've been unfriended. I don't have a Facebook account, but I'm just going on what I hear from other people. So that being unfriended is, it's like birth is dukkha. There is that the mind has been born into that, and so that act of rejection is painful. So that if you really invite these reflections in, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, all those people who have friended me, they can unfriend me. All those likes can be dislikes. They can be switched off. And if we recognize, that's all that arises passes away. Oh, of course. Then rather than feeling like something bad has happened or something has gone wrong with nature, then the heart recognizes, of course, it was always this way. What begins ends. What comes into being has to come to an end. Of course, how could it be otherwise? So the effect of that is challenging to the ego or to self-view, but it's of great relief to your heart, to the citta itself. There's a sense of naturalness and a kind of common wisdom, a common sense, if you like. So I strongly encourage, if you want to live well, you want to learn how to live in a good way, the first things are to get to know your habits of self-view. So maybe you feel like, well, I'm not really attached to my body, and I don't really care. People worry that I don't take care of my health enough. But are you attached to your position, your role as a doctor or a professor or a head of a company, or of a certain wealth, or you have a good reputation, or even your reputation as a compassionate person, that you have all this charitable activity, but you're really invested in all the good things that you do. That it can even be our wholesome activities can be something that the mind clings to, and so to look and see where are we attached, and just to invite in the meditation to invite that kind of reflection in. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. So, as a monk, I don't have any possessions really, just a few robes in a bag and not much else. But I can get very possessive about my reputation. So if I'm criticized, or say Ajahn Amaro is really stupid, or he's a bad monk, or he's kind of heretical, he misquotes the Buddha, then it can be painful. So that's that which is beloved and pleasing, say my reputation, that is also to be considered, to be reflected on. So I strongly encourage an active exploring. Okay, what are the things that the mind is stuck on, that feels possessive of, and then to use these ways of reflecting to challenge that, to explore that, and to see how much fear there is around that, and in that act of turning towards it, to see how the heart changes. Another consideration in learning to live well, and a teaching I thought to share with you, is because also you have a very Western education system here, inherited from the British. Sorry about this. Our colonial past. I apologize to my ancestors and forebears, but the education here is very based on kind of scientific materialism and the experimental method and critical study and so forth. That's the way that we're educated, and also it's very much in accord with the Buddha's teachings, like I was saying at the beginning, that it doesn't encourage a blind belief, but to explore and to find out for yourself. And so oftentimes when we look at Buddhist teachings, or we relate to Buddhist teachings from a more of an ancestral point of view, like it's our parents' faith, or this is what is the beliefs in our families, and so the sense of past lives and future lives, and if you make really good karma, then you might get to heaven, or that you want to offer things to make merit, or to store up the investment in your good karma bank, the kind of celestial bank account of your good karma points. That these are easily attitudes that creep in, and that there is, say, following customs or engaging in particular practices that you feel, oh, it's for my next life, or I'm really worried about where I'm going to go after I die. So living well, oftentimes, and this is very, very strong in Thailand. I'm not sure, probably in Sri Lanka, that people often visit the temple and they want to make offerings so that it's like a kind of fire insurance policy. That they don't want to go down to the fires. So it's a sort of fire insurance to go to the temple, make a few offerings, and kind of set things up for your retirement plan up in in a nice, comfortable place where you're not going to get roasted forever. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not joking. And so that there's a lot of folk belief around that. But also, it's really one of the most interesting and helpful teachings of the Buddha is it's a teaching that's based on our own personal experience here and now, and it's called the Apannaka Sutta. It's Sutta number 60 in the Majjhima Nikaya. Is that right, Bhante? Okay. I'm probably mispronouncing the Pali, but Apannaka, meaning the incontrovertible teaching. And so this is very helpful of relating to how to live well, and how to live well not just based on hoping for the future of like being reborn in heaven, or coming back as a human being, really rich and good looking and comfortable and so on, or even coming back to be reborn in the time of the next Buddha, the Buddha Maitreya, but rather focusing on the present reality. So and if those of you who've studied Christianity or Christian philosophy or Western philosophy, it's very close to what's called Pascal's wager. The Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, he talked about this in terms of Christian practice in a very similar way. So the Apannaka Sutta, and this is a kind of rough outline of it. So the Buddha says something along the lines of it might be that a good person, they live a life in a very unwholesome way. And he's very polite. He says, this good person lives a life which is very unwholesome. They steal, they take life, they engage in dishonesty, they tell lies. And because of that standard of their conduct, then in this lifetime, they attract bad friends to them, they are disrespected by the wise, they sleep badly at night, and at the end of their life, their mind is filled with regret. And then the Buddha says, so it might be that there is no life after this one. But if that's the case, this person has made an unpleasant abiding for themselves here and now. That you created this uncomfortable, unpleasant living conditions for yourself. You're not respected by wise people. You attract bad friends to you. You sleep badly at night, and you tend to be filled with regrets at the end of your life. So he said that, but if there is a life after this one, then certainly those actions will be liable to take that being to a quote-unquote unpleasant destination. and so that they have made an unlucky throw on both counts. So he talks about it in terms of a gamble. So they've made an unlucky throw of the dice on both counts. Another good person, so this other good person, they live according to the precepts, they are honest, they are trustworthy, they don't take life, they don't steal, they don't tell lies, they live in a virtuous way. Such a person, they attract good friends to them, they sleep easily at night, they are respected by the wise, and then at the end of their lives, their minds are free of regret. So that if there is no life after this one, then they've made a pleasant abiding for themselves here and now. But if there is a life after this one, then they have set the conditions for them to reappear in a quote-unquote pleasant destination. So they've made a lucky throw on both counts. So I know this is a bit of a gambling town. So it's probably a very appropriate sutta to quote. But I would highly recommend this because it's very interesting that in the way that the Buddha speaks, he's suggesting that maybe his teachings about past lives and future lives, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe there is no life before this one or after this one. Maybe this is the only life that we have. Maybe. But even so, it's wise to live in a virtuous way. It's wise to be kind and compassionate, to be living in a way that is respectful and honest and in accordance with Sila. That even if there is no life after this one, that's how you benefit yourself. So living a good life, it's not just fire insurance for the future, but it's right here and now. This is the way that we can, say, establish a pleasant abiding, a pleasant situation for ourselves. So and I feel that particularly because I live in the West, I lived in Asia as a monk only a couple of years at the very beginning, but since 1979 I lived in Britain and the USA. So I've spent almost my entire monastic life, nearly 40 years, in the Western society, and so this skeptical materialist education and attitude is very, very common, and so that people like to have things proved, and so that the idea of assuming there are lives before this one and there are lives after one is not an assumption that most Western people like to make. That many people say they reject that idea. They like Buddhist teachings, they like Buddhist practice, but they reject the idea of past lives or future lives. And so this is a teaching that is very applicable to people, that it doesn't depend on any kind of metaphysical perspective, no kind of belief, but beyond what we can see with our own senses. But you can take the advice of the Buddha, whether there is or there isn't a life after this one, then the wise thing to do is to be kind, to be honest, to be unselfish, and to respect the Sila. And this is the way we do ourselves most favors and benefit others as well. So some of the other aspects of living well that the Buddha speaks about in the teachings that I thought I might share. It's a kind of refinements on the how to develop mindfulness and clear comprehension, or living mindfully and living in a way of like making the best use of our abilities and the best use of our intelligence, our capacities, because in some of the teachings it's not spelled out particularly clearly, but I think in this particular set of qualities of a sappurisa, a good person, then it gives some good directions about how to live in a well-rounded way, to be a well-rounded person, to sort of use your abilities in the best possible way to benefit yourself and to benefit others most completely. So there's another of the Buddha's lists. I believe there's 7 qualities on this. I'll check with Bhante later on, but I believe there's 7 qualities. So these are the qualities of a sappurisa, or a good person, a well-rounded person, or a mature human being. So the first 2 are dhammanyutta and attanyutta. So these are, it's not just knowing the Dhamma, but particularly, and I'm using the description given by Venerable Payutto Bhikkhu in Thailand, his descriptions of these qualities. So dhammanyutta is knowing the causes of things or the origins of things, and so considering where things come from. And then atanyuta, that's not atta as in self, but A-T-H, atta. And the consequences or the results of things, so that we reflect not just on what we're experiencing, but where's it come from, and then where's it going? What are the consequences of our actions? So these dhammanyuta and attanyuta are the first two, to develop a reflective mind that looks into causes and looks into effects. So we're learning to recognize the patterns in which our life works. So that here we are on a Tuesday evening, right? And we're at the Buddhist library. You've made a choice to come here, and the causes of coming here is because of your interest in Buddhism, your faith in the teachings. Maybe you saw my name and thought, oh, I've heard about him, or my friends told me this was a good monk to go and listen to, so okay, I'll go along. So we look at the causes, and then to consider the effects of the actions that we have. What are the consequences? So that we're looking at things not just in isolation, but where they come from. Like just the other day, driving through Singapore, and I noticed that this is a heavily built-up area, and it's 5 million people living on this small island. So I was asking the friends in the car, okay, well, where does all the food come from? There's 5 million people. Are there any farms in Singapore? How do you feed all the people? What do you do with all the waste? There's 5 million people on this little island. There's a lot of rubbish that's produced. What happens to all the waste? So I think they were a little bit surprised I was asking about these things, but it was in that kind of spirit. Okay, you don't just, because sometimes people just think, well, the city is there. It's there because it's there. It's always been there. I mean, it's Singapore. It's here. It's this. But then think, well, it's come together because Sir Stamford Raffles landed on that bit of the beach and said, good spot. This will do. I think we could develop this. Or some Rafflesian statement. So that where do the things come from? And then it was interesting to me. Okay, there's hardly any farms left in Singapore. All the food comes from elsewhere. And then asking about the water supply. And then our friend, Brother Yap here, is very involved with Singapore's water supply for many years. So it's full of all sorts of interesting answers. And also, talking about development. People say, oh, they want to bring another 2 million people here to Singapore. Oh, how's that going to work? Where are they all going to live? But I have been very impressed by the thoughtfulness, the attention to dhammanyuta and attanyuta, the kind of causes and effects with the Singaporean community, that the things have been set up in a thoughtful way, so the rivers are quite clean now, and the rubbish is all incinerated, and the rubbish that the ashes or the rubbish that has been incinerated, you turn into new islands to develop as more territory, and there's a thoughtfulness, planting a lot of trees, making parks, connecting the parks together, having walkways for the animals. So this is all very, very thoughtful because of looking to the consequences of if you don't think about how to protect the environment, how you're going to protect the water supply, how you're going to keep the air clean, then the next generation are really going to suffer. And so it's that sense of, okay, this is convenient for me, but what about the next generation? So I'm not a politician or a political scientist, but one of the things that I find painful is to see how in many countries the political focus is on me getting re-elected. Whatever it takes to get the politician re-elected, they'll do it. And that the effects of, well, what can we do now that will be useful in 20 years' time or 50 years' time is put to one side, because I'm not going to be in power, so it doesn't really matter. As long as I can get re-elected and I'll look good, then I'll promote this. So that lack of thinking for the next generation or the next 7 generations, I feel is a weakness in the global society, and I feel that literally thinking for this next 7 generations is to really think ahead to the extent that we can. Okay, what are we bringing into the world? Why are we doing it? What are going to be the consequences, to the degree that one can envision that it's much more skillful than the kind of direction that things go, just thinking about immediate benefit for me now. And that the sense of isolation, I feel that is very strong in the world, that me as the individual is the most important thing. And how when we look at the causes and effects, it also helps us to consider the relational quality of our existence. We live in relationship to the planet, to our food supply, our water supply, to each other, to our neighbors, to our family, our friends. So then the other anyutas, so then the next one is atanyuta, knowing yourself, knowing your own character. Are you optimistic? Are you depressive? Are you a pessimist? Are you a mathematical type? Are you an artistic type? How are you? What's your character? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? So knowing your own character, and not always just doing the things that you're good at, but also working to say use the capacities that you have, knowing the strengths that you have, knowing the weaknesses that you have. Then matanyuta is knowing the right amount, which is very, very helpful, not just in terms of the right amount of food to eat, but the right amount of time to spend staring at a computer screen, or the right amount of time to be available to your family, the right amount of exercise to take, or the right amount of relaxation to have. So this is a very, very central principle of spiritual training. And in my life as a forest monk, this was one of the emphases that Luang Por Chah would make, knowing what is podi, what's good enough, knowing what the right amount is, what you need. And often when we look at matanyuta, knowing the right amount, or knowing, considering what we need, it's a lot less than what we want. That we can learn to be more resilient, more adaptable. We can use the spiritual training to learn how much we really need, and not to be starving ourselves or making life difficult or uncomfortable for ourselves, but rather learning to measure what is appropriate in terms of the way you use your time, the way you use your energy, and how you look after yourself, what you choose to do. If we know the right amount, then we can live in a much more balanced way. If we don't know the right amount, then we're always overdoing it, spending too much time in front of the computer, too much time in the workplace, not enough time with your children, or too much time in the monastery, too much time listening to Dhamma talks, and not enough time actually doing your work. It can vary, but knowing that right amount. There was one of the meditation centers that we use in Thailand is called Ban Por, which means enough house. And the reason why it's called Por is the Thai word for enough. Like Podi means good enough. And so the person who was building this house, the owner, was a woman called Yom Dao. And as they were developing this place, the architect said, "Oh, you're a Buddhist. You're supposed to know what the right amount is. But it's never enough. You want another wing over here, and an extra story there, and an extra porch on this side of the building, and another kind of little hall over there, and it's never enough." So she as the Buddhist practitioner was being scolded by her architect, saying, it's never enough. You always want more. You want more. You want more. So to her credit, she called it enough house, Ban Por, to give herself a teaching. I'm like, okay, so even when you're trying to develop a Buddhist place, you can get, it can be too much, mak gunpai, too much. So matanyuta, knowing the right amount, is extremely helpful. Then knowing the right time, kalanyuta, is it the right time to talk with your friend about the difficult issue in the workplace, or is it the right time to ask your wife or your husband to have a holiday away from them? Is it the right time to go off on retreat to the monastery? Is it the right time to leave work to go to the Buddhist group? Knowing the time and to be paying attention. As one of Shakespeare's plays in King Lear, one of the characters, the Duke of Gloucester, says, "Ripeness is all." Ripeness, not rightness, ripeness. Ripeness is all, so that knowing that when things are ripe, okay, that's the right amount of time. This is the time to speak up. This is the time to be quiet. This is the time to act. This is the time to be still. This is the time to go. This is the time to stay. Then the last two are knowing the characters of other people, the pugalanyuta. So not just knowing your own character, but knowing the characters of the people around you, your children, your parents, the people that you work with, the people with you on the street and in the shops, to be paying attention to how other people's characters are. And so when you want to live a good life, you want to be sort of in tune with things, you pay attention. You don't just assume everyone thinks the way that you do, because we're different. My version of the world is different from yours, and so that to be considering how other people have their perspectives, and to be bringing that into account. Or is this person, are they an energetic type, or are they a shy type? Are they going to be, if you ask them to give a presentation, are they going to be terrified and just in a ball of anxiety for a couple of weeks? Or are they always ready to talk? Is that the wrong person to ask to do that particular job? So knowing the character of other people. And then the last one is parisanyutta, knowing the group that you're talking to. So here I am in Singapore, so at the Buddhist library, so talking with the Singaporean crowd. I'm the only Caucasian, I think, in the entire room. This is a very Singaporean group. There's not a European group, because here we are in Singapore. So they're talking about life in Singapore to a group of Singaporeans, of course, because that's who the parisa is. This is the group that you're talking to. If you're in a classroom of 6-year-olds, you talk in a different way. If you're in Thailand, you talk in a different way. If I was at Amaravati, I'll be talking in a different way. So that you're attuning to who are we with? Who is the parisa, the group? What's the situation? What's my role in relationship to the group? So I realize there's a lot of Pali words there, but these are, in terms of living in a good way, living a good life, these are these dimensions. So knowing the cause, knowing causes, knowing effects, knowing your own character, knowing the right amount, knowing the right time, knowing other people's characters, and knowing the group that you're with. This is all ways that we fill out the quality of mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajanya, like essentially learning to attune, paying attention, being observant, and then thinking things through, like using your ability to recognize patterns and to use your intelligence, and letting those skills help you to function better as a human being. And also, one of the points I was making in an earlier talk here is that as you consider causes and effects, I think the talk I gave yesterday in the Nibbana Dhammaraka Center, when you consider causes and effects, then it steers you towards living in a virtuous way, because when you do something which is selfish or indulgent or cruel, then there's painful consequences. In that moment, you might forget that, because that thing is so attractive, or that person is so annoying. So you insult them, or you attack them, or you chase after that attractive object. But if the mind picks up, well, what's the consequences of this? Where will this go? Okay, let's not go there, because this is painful. So the natural result of being more observant and more using your skills and your intelligence in a way that's more in tune with Dhamma is that you naturally choose to live more virtuously. So then, dying a good death, to get onto that piece of things, to die a good death, then one of the practices or reflections I was talking about on the weekend was a little death rehearsal. Some of you were there and engaging in that. So that if we are reflecting on our life along the way and we're living in a skillful way, then we're doing the best we can. We're creating good causes along the way. If we're living in a thoughtful way, we're living in a way that's considerate of other people. We're living in a way that's virtuous and mindful. There still might be a bit of unfinished business at the end. So to die a good death, then to the extent that you can, then you to look back and to consider these. I outlined 4 different areas that are good to contemplate. So as your life is coming to an end and to die a good death, to look at your regrets, things that you regret having done and said, and things that you resent or that other people did that you experienced the effects of. So the things that you regret of your own conduct, things that you resent or feel negative about in other people's conduct. So those are the first 2. And in the meditation, the guided meditation I was giving about this on Sunday, and I want to emphasize it again, the point is not to be piling up guilt feelings, like to look back at your regrets, to say, yeah, that was really bad, I really shouldn't have done it, I'm a really bad person. Yes, that's what I am. Or to look at your resentments, like, yes, she done me wrong, that was really evil, I'll hate her for eternity, and I want revenge. I'm determined to come back and destroy that person's life over and over again forever. That's not the point. The point is to look at those things, to let the personal perspective go. Again, it's letting go of self-view and seeing things from a nature-centered perspective rather than a self-centered perspective. So when you look back at and see the things you regret, say, okay, well, I was a monk for all those years, but I did so many things that were really indulgent, or that were I was really very casual or sloppy about. I really hurt a lot of people's feelings, and that, okay, that's the way the mind remembers it. But let's consider, you weren't an arahant at the time, so that therefore the mind is influenced by greed, hatred, and delusion. So that yes, those things that were done did have painful consequences, but can they be forgiven? Can they just be ready to recognize that people make mistakes? You were young, you were stupid, and young, stupid people make mistakes. That's what we do. And so that the point is to let it be recognized, and just as with the 5 subjects of frequent recollection, by turning towards it, you learn to see it as part of nature, that birth, aging, sickness, and death is natural. So similarly, you turn your attention towards your own actions, and you say, well, why would I expect myself to behave like an arahant when the mind was still governed by greed, hatred, and delusion? And we suffer from this a lot in society. We get outraged. We kind of expect people to behave like arahants. But, in Buddhist psychology, sanity comes with arahantship. So you're not entirely sane until you're an arahant. So this is the psych ward, assuming there's no arahants in the room. This is the psychiatric ward. We are spending our lives with our fellow patients on the psychiatric ward. So if you think of each other as fellow psychiatric patients, we can be a lot more forgiving. You look at a newspaper report, politician discovered to be lying. Well. What a surprise. Businessman pulls shady deal. Huge tax avoidance scheme uncovered. Gosh, what a surprise. People cheat, people lie because they're crazy. It's not excusing that behavior, but if you see that if we think, how could they do that? That's outrageous. It's like, well, if they were an arahant, you have a good reason to be upset. If you recognize, well, this is a fellow psychiatric patient, so that person, they were given a lot of power and they got drunk on it. They got carried away. They made some stupid choices. They thought they wouldn't get caught. They got caught. That's what happened. So we can be not pretending that harm hasn't been done, but we can recognize, well, that it can be forgiven. So the point of these reflections are both what you regret for yourself and then what you resent other people doing to you. Things that people in your family who treated you really unfairly or unkindly. Like your parents, they preferred your sister to you. You were always looked down on and criticized, and your sister was always praised, or your brother. And so those kind of things can be really hurtful. Carry them around the whole lifetime. Can we recognize, well, not every parent is totally unbiased. People don't have to pass an exam in order to become a parent, right? There's no test, right? That's not how we work as human beings. So that, and I didn't really discover this until I was already been a monk about 10 years, and I got to be the kind of age my parents were when they married. And I got to be the same sort of age that my dad was when he and my mother married. And I began to sort of see myself in him and him in me. I would remember all these horrible things that I said to him and thought about him when I was a teenager. We had these extremely heated exchanges. I was a sort of hippie anarchist. Yeah. And my father's, I'm the youngest child of older parents, and both my parents were the youngest child of older parents. So my father's father was born in 1863. His mother was born in 1875. So my grandfather was born before cars were invented, before London had electricity. So that was a long, long time ago. So my dad grew up in a kind of, as the youngest child of a kind of Victorian family in England. So of course he was a little bit bigoted, kind of racist and reactionary, and so I had a lot of arguments with him. But then, as I got to be in my late 30s, early 40s, and I began to sort of put myself in his shoes, I could feel those really conceited and self-righteous comments I'd made. Like, well, why on earth should he have known what he was doing? Why should he have a sort of a cohesive and inclusive, universal vision of humanity like me, and see everything right like I do? He grew up in a kind of Edwardian Britain, from Victorian parents, and that when he had children, he didn't have to pass an exam to know what to do. He literally, when my eldest sister was born, his first comment to my mother was, "Do they always look like that?" So she this is our first, her dear firstborn child. So my mother said that if she hadn't been feeling so weak, she would have clobbered him. But so why should I expect my father to be completely flawless and wise and peaceful and calm and wise and skillful and behave like an arahant? He's just like an ordinary, regular person. He was conditioned by his upbringing, his childhood, the world he grew up in. When most of the map of the world was, there was lots of red for the British Empire. Singapore was British, Malaya was British, India was British, Canada was British, Australia, New Zealand is all red, South Africa is all red. So that was the world he grew up in. So I used to have these kind of intense arguments with him about being racist and colonial and such like. And I saw how cruel, how unforgiving I was, and that I could let that go. So then letting go of resentments, not to carry them around or to feel bad about resenting others, but just to see, we feel negative about others when we've been hurt by them or we've been upset by them. Then the other two things to consider are what you're grateful for. Again, not to create a sense of being indebted, like you owe your Dhamma teachers or you owe your parents forever and ever. It's not to create a self-centered view, but rather to really partake of the joyfulness of being appreciative, having gratitude. Katanyuta is a very beautiful state of mind, to be grateful for all the blessings that you received from your teachers, your parents, the society, the teachers that you had as a child. So gratefulness, and then to be consciously appreciating what you've been blessed with. And then the last one is, certainly for most Westerners, is the most difficult one of all, is to appreciate your own goodness. So if with Christian conditioning, any kind of positive thought about yourself is taken as being conceited, or being arrogant, or you're being selfish. But the Buddha encouraged this practice called Chaganusati, to remember your own goodness. Like you have Marananusati, the mindfulness of death, or Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Chaganusati is being mindful of your own goodness, your own generosity. So to look back at your life and to appreciate the good things that you've done. Not to be conceited or inflated or proud, but rather to recognize if somebody else had done them, you would be really pleased. I'm so glad all the Firefly Mission people, they did this fantastic job. Great, good stuff. Of course, I didn't really do anything. I was just kind of getting in the way, but all the others were really great. So, well, if you were talking about someone else, you would be ready to praise your own actions, if you follow what I'm saying. But if it wasn't you that you were talking about, but one of your friends, you'd be abundant in your praise and appreciation, because it's me. That, well, I was kind of just, I didn't really do anything. I was sort of getting in the way, or I didn't really help, or it wasn't that much. So we can be over humble in a destructive way, and it's to recollect your own goodness. To be able to say, yeah, I'm really glad I did that. That was a beautiful thing. Yeah, that was lovely to be able to do that, and there was all kinds of good consequences that came from that. Yes, good. It's like to recognize your own blessings and to appreciate the good qualities that you have. So for a good death, I recommend these 4 particular reflections: to look at regrets, resentments, gratitudes, and gladness about your own activity. And then maybe the last things I see that as time is moving on, but maybe the last set of reflections to consider is the whole way that we relate to birth and death in the first place. Because even though I'm talking a lot about letting go of self-view, there can still be this kind of conceit that I was born, I'm dying, this is who and what I am. Even in a subtle way, there's 2 layers of self-view. One is the coarse level is Sakkaya Ditthi, which is I am the body, I'm the personality. But a whole deeper and more subtle level of identification is what's called Asmi Mana, the conceit of I am. And so that, even if there's a letting go of the body, the personality, personal characteristics, there can still be this I am feeling that clusters around our actions in this life. There's a very significant discourse that is called the Khemaka Sutta, about this old monk Khemaka who was on his deathbed, and his friends had asked him, Khemaka, have you finished your work as a monk? Have you reached full enlightenment? There's a bit of a sort of preamble to their conversation that they goes back and forth, and eventually he gets up off his sick bed and goes to see his friends and says, no, I haven't completed my practice, because even though there's no identification with the 5 khandhas, I don't see any aspect of the body or the personality that I think of as me and mine. Still there's this feeling of I that hovers around. It's like with a flower, you can't tell that the fragrance comes from the pollen or the petals or the stamens or the sepals, but still you can smell the flower. In the same way, you can't tell where this I feeling comes from, but it hangs around. And he's unique insofar as he was giving this explanation to his friends, he became an arahant. So he became enlightened hearing his own Dhamma talk. So it's a unique instance in the teachings. So the letting go of the conceit of identity, of asmimana, is a whole extra layer. And so that why I talk about this is that the whole idea that I have been born, I will die, that this life is mine, this is who and what I am, when the insight is really developed, then that very presumption of I am is cut away as well. And so that the whole idea of I was born, I will die is challenged, and that instead of that, the mind can awaken to that unborn, undying aspect of being. Like I said at the very beginning, the Buddha said, why should I also chase after what is born, aging, ailing and dying? Why don't I seek after the unborn, the unaging, the undying, the unailing, the deathless? So that applies for us too, because if the mind awakens to the quality of the deathless, then that which is born will die, but what's that got to do with what is real? If the mind which can be aware of beginnings and endings is not tied to those beginnings and endings. So that if we talk about realizing the deathless, then that's talking about the aspect of our being that's not tied up with the body or the personality, with any aspect of birth and death. There's a quotation from the Sutra of Huineng, from the Chinese Buddhist canon. So I know there's a lot of Chinese people here. So maybe many of you are familiar with it's also called the Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra, or the Sutra of Huineng. And there's this particular passage that goes, in this moment there is no thing that comes to be. In this moment there is no thing that ceases to be. Thus, in this moment, there is no birth and death to be brought to an end. Therefore, this moment is the absolute peace. And though it is just this moment, there is no limit to this moment, and herein is eternal delight. So this is one of my favorite passages from that particular sutra. And I feel it encompasses very, very skillfully this principle of this dimension of our being, that aspect of our citta, which is unborn, undying. We say, sanditiko, the Dhamma is akaliko, sanditiko, akaliko, ehipassiko, apparent here and now, timeless. That's talking about us. That's our mind that's referring to. That's the Dhamma is not somewhere else. It's the very nature of our own, being, if you like. And so that we think of the Dhamma as this kind of quality over there, but what aspect of your body and mind is not an attribute of nature? Nature is Dhammajati, born of the Dhamma. So if you like, or one way of seeing every aspect of our nature, what we are, body and mind, and every aspect, is an attribute of Dhamma. So when we talk about realizing the deathless, it's awakening and realizing an aspect of our own being which is already present. We miss it because we're so busy with our list of things to do and our personality and our ideas and our family and that face in the mirror. But realizing the deathless is realizing an aspect of your own mind, this mind. And if you think, well, you don't know my mind, Ajahn, I didn't get one of those deathless things when they kind of fitted us all out at birth, I'd say. I would say that you should consider that as a view, but rather in terms of dying a good death or living a good life, this sort of radical perspective of wisdom and seeing things clearly is to recognize, well, that which was born and that which dies is not self in the first place. Sabbe dhamma anatta, all phenomena, all things are not self. That which is born, that which is dying is not who and what we are. So when a body is born, a body dies, what's that got to do with what is real? I realize it's maybe a little bit of a challenging concept, but if you take an image, just to finish, so it's like if we live on the earth, and here we are on the surface of the earth, so now it's night time, we're in the shadow, because the earth is spinning. So we get day and night, day and night, day and night, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. Because of sitting on the surface of the planet, we experience beginnings and endings, birth and death, birth and death, and birth and death. If you let go of the planet and take the position of the sun, then from the position of the sun, using this as an analogy, then the earth is spinning out in space, but from the position of the sun, there's no days and nights, there's no sunrise, no sunset. That reality is stable, is fixed. And then the spinning of the earth, you see the movement of births and deaths, the beginnings and endings is known, but what does the turning of the earth have to do with the nature of the the sun in its essence, if you can follow that analogy. If you take the position of the sun, why should the turning of the earth have any effect on how the sun is? So similarly, if the quality of wisdom and awareness is fully realized, then the breath comes and goes, thoughts come and go, feelings come and go, bodies come and go. So? But of course the depth of our attachment is very intense. Well, I am this body, I am a man, I am a woman, I am Singaporean, I am English, that's what I am. And so we use meditation, and particularly vipassana, insight meditation, to challenge those presumptions, to break free of those conceits. And as the Buddha said to the monk Meghiya, that the freeing of the heart from the conceit of identity, that is nibbana here and now. To free the mind from asmimana, that conceit of I, that is nibbana here and now. So I would say this is not beyond any of us, that we are gathered here together to listen to a Dhamma teaching for this particular evening. And if you have enough interest, enough faith to sit here for an hour or so and listen to these teachings, then as Ajahn Chah would say, if you've got enough patience and wisdom to come to Wat Pah Pong and listen to a Dhamma talk, then you've got enough patience to live. You've got enough spiritual qualities to liberate your heart. That's a paraphrase, but so I would encourage you, that you do have the capacities to fully liberate the heart, the mind, and that the most comprehensive way to live a good life and live a good death is to recognize that which is unborn and undying, that's always been here, that's been the very foundation of your reality from the beginning. And so that when that is fully realized, and then the best that can be done with the life and with the death will be actualized. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening. Yeah, go ahead. But I don't know what the format is here, so lead on.
Brothers and sisters, Ajahn is very kind to take questions, perhaps for maybe about 10-15 minutes before we wrap up tonight's session. So anyone would like to start?
There's a hand way at the back there.
Do you need a mic? Can you?
Just about, yeah. It's easier than crossing the whole room. So. Well, it's rather like a hall like this. That if you have a spacious place, if it's filled with furniture and old carpets and pieces of packing crates, or the place is cluttered and filled with objects. Some of them useful, some of them not useful, some of them you don't even know what they are. So to clear out all of the old clutter, the old furniture, the old carpets, bits and pieces, clear the space out, then say, okay, now what can we use this space for? I mean, this building probably had all kinds of different purposes before the Buddhist library took it over. And maybe this was several different rooms, and they kind of opened it all up so they could have a big space to accommodate all these people so that Dhamma talks could be given here. So it's exactly the same with the mind, is that you to the extent possible, you unclutter the mind to increase the capacity to, see things clearly, to be inclusive, to free the mind of the biases or the agati, the biases of aversion, of desire, of fear, and of opinions. So that you've got a nice big space and no clutter, it's clean, it's tidy. Okay, now we can have a class in here, we can have a meditation session in here, we could have a children's Dhamma theatre performance. You could do all kinds of things with the space. And so in terms of how you clear the space out, it's like first of all identifying the clutter. And if the intention is okay, let's clear this room out, then you have to be kind of relentless. If you get too interested in I remember this chair. Oh, my granny used to own this. Oh, this is really nice. You get drawn in by the history of the different furniture or that different stories about the different things. So you say, no, let's clear it all out. Let's kind of make the space open. So there's a recognition of what is cluttering up the mind, and then applying the energy to recognize that and let go of your opinions, like the agati, the biases, your fears, your aversions, your attachments, desires, and your opinions, and to recognize those aspects of mind that cause the mental space to be occupied, and to the extent possible to let those go, so that then the mind is in as unbiased and attentive state as possible. This is a hand way at the back there.
Hello. Good evening, Venerable. I have a question. If a person lying on the bed and waiting for the moment of transition from life to death, how he could have a confidence that when he go over, there's a better place for him? You know what I mean? No, it's like you're going for a tour, you have the brochure of the nice place, you know. So I'm wondering whether, is it possible to have a kind of perception that where he's going to?
Well, depends on the person. There's an interesting sutta, it's number 120 in the Majjhima Nikaya, called the Reappearance Through Aspiration. And the Buddha describes, again, if I can remember this correctly, the Buddha describes that if a person wants to be reborn in a particular realm, then as they're reaching the end of their life, then they can direct their attention to being reborn in the Tavatimsa heaven, or the Tusita heaven, or the realm of the 100,000-fold Brahma, and so forth. It goes into quite a lot of detail and spells out different realms. But then the catch is that he says, this is for the virtuous, not for the unvirtuous. So, like, you've got to have the credit on your card. You know? If you haven't got enough cash in the bank, then it's not going to work. But it's quite a matter of fact in terms of directionality, saying that you can fix your mind. But if the person has the paramita, the spiritual capacity, and virtue, as he puts it in that instance, to direct the attention, it can be given that. But the more important thing is sort of to do your homework beforehand, to get the paramitas developed. And as I was saying about how to live wisely as a human being, to developing those good human qualities, to be living in a way that's unselfish, that is kindly, and is based on virtue, then as the Buddha says, then you're making a lucky throw. It's still a throw, but you're setting the conditions in place whereby the likelihood is that the consciousness will gravitate to a pleasant destination.
Okay, thank you.
The best thing, though, is there's one of the most helpful teachings that, on this area that I talked about on the weekend is what's called the Four Consolations. That the Buddha's talking to his relative Mahanama, and Mahanama's asked him about what advice do you give somebody on their deathbed? What's the best advice to give? And the Buddha said, well, first of all, you give the Four Consolations, which is the consolation that you have unwavering faith in the Buddha, unwavering faith in the Dhamma, unwavering faith in the Sangha, and that the fourth consolation is that you have also lived in a way that is virtuous, the sila samanyutta, like you have the heartfelt commitment to the sila. And so if that is the case, then reminding somebody on their deathbed, those qualities will really serve you in very, very good stead. So that was said the person should be strengthened. If they have been a disciple or they've taken refuge in the Triple Gem, they should firstly be consoled. The word consolation, like comforted by those reflections on those Four Consolations. Then having given those Four Consolations, then the person should be asked, are you still worried about your wife and children? Assuming it's a man that's dying. Well, yes, I am. Okay, well, whether you're worried about your wife and children or you're not worried about your wife and children, you're still going to die anyway. So it's much better for you to stop worrying about your wife and children. And if they say they're not worried about their wife and children, you say, are you worried about your parents? And they say, yes, I'm still worried about my parents. Okay, well, whether you worry about your parents or you don't worry about your parents, you're still going to die anyway. So please let go of your worry about your parents and so forth through other concerns that the person might have. Then he says, then having encouraged them to let go of their worries, then they should be asked, the person would say, well, I've let go of all those worries now. I want to direct my mind towards being reborn in the heaven of the Four Great Kings. And the Buddha said, well, why do you, they should be encouraged, well, why bother putting your attention on being reborn in the realm of the Four Great Kings? You could be reborn in the Tavatimsa heaven, and then why bother with Tavatimsa? You could go to the Yamadevas and so on, Two-seater Devas, and up through the heavenly realms, up to the realm of Mahabrahma. And then said, well, and then finally it says for the Brahma realm, then why? Then the person should be encouraged. Why consider? Why bother being reborn in the Brahma realm? It would be far better for you to direct your attention to what is called Sakaya Nirodha, which means the cessation of identity. So like Sakaya Ditti is self-view, Sakaya Nirodha is the cessation of identity. And that so that will be for the greatest benefit in terms of your attitude and your quality of realization and intention at this ending of your life. And so then also, as I was mentioning on the weekend, that it's very significant that the Buddha then says, and forgive me if I'm misquoting this, says the state of mind, one who has realized that quality of Sakaya Nirodha, even if they're, as a layperson, they realize that there's no difference in the quality of liberation in that person's mind between that layperson on their deathbed and someone who's been a monk who's been an arahant for 100 years. That the state of liberation is exactly the same. So it's one of the instances where the Buddha talks about a layperson being enlightened, but he makes that comparison that if the mind has let go or has freed itself from concerns and the urge to be reborn in any state whatsoever, then that quality of liberation is equivalent to someone who's been an arahant for 100 years.
Good evening, Ajahn, and thank you very much for your teachings. I have a question about meditation, because I've just started meditation about less than 2 weeks ago. And while meditating, I try to focus on my breathing. And then after a while, the breathing gets away. But then I always have to swallow my saliva. So is that right, or am I in the stage of already in a stage of calmness, and yet I still got to swallow my saliva all the time?
Those kind of physical effects can be very common, and the main thing I would suggest is not letting the mind be too worried about that. Just to develop an attitude of sort of acceptance or kind of casual attitude, rather than thinking it's something that shouldn't be happening or why is this happening. Often it's because you're paying attention to the body and your own internal activity in a way that you never have done before, and so that the mind can empower things by the attention it gives it. So sometimes people can become totally obsessed with, like, I don't want to swallow, I mustn't swallow, oh, I'm swallowing. And it's like, well, it's not illegal to swallow your saliva. You won't be arrested or charged or punished. It's just your saliva, it's your mouth. It's just, to develop an almost casual attitude, it's like, okay, well, I'm not quite sure why this is happening, but yeah, no big thing. And so that you're relaxing the attitude towards it, and if that's the biggest problem that you have in your meditation, well, so far so good.
My next and last question. Sometimes I drink moderately at night. Can I meditate if I do so?
Can you meditate?
When I drink alcohol, wine.
Oh, you drink? That's what you said. When you dream.
Drink. Sorry.
So you dream moderately at night.
Drink moderately. Sometimes red wine, and then I would like to meditate always before I sleep. Is it okay to do that?
Well, drinking alcohol is contrary to the precept. So that
yeah, I know.
You won't be surprised that I would say that's not advised to do, because the point of alcohol is it makes you be less mindful. That's why people drink it, so that it makes the mind more dull and deluded. And that's a delusion, a kind of delusion that people often like. But even though it might be brings some qualities that are likable or comfortable, it brings much more in the way of negative consequences as well. So I would encourage you to not drink, and to use the meditation for arriving at that quality of relaxation and comfort, rather than using alcohol.
Thank you very much, Ajahn.
I see the time has gone past 9 o'clock, so I think it's probably time to wrap up. So this is scheduled to be my last evening in Singapore. I was last here 40 years ago, so I hope it's not another 40 years. But there'll be a lot more grey hairs in the room. It is, but I'm very glad to have been able to be here and spend this time with you all. Please come and visit Amaravati in England if you have the opportunity. It's very, very snowy there at the moment. but English weather is famously changeable, so you do have a very comfortable times of the year as well. It's very beautiful, but chilly at the moment. But please, if you have the opportunity to be in England, we're only half an hour on the train north of London, so it's very easy to get to, so please, you have a welcome from me and an invitation. Please do come if you can.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.